Okay, here's one from Stephen. And his question goes like this. There's an ongoing debate about the relationship between class and imperialism, with people arguing about the relevance of concepts like privilege and ethnicity. What is your input on this issue? Well, here again, the Marxism comes to the fore. No question that the modern history of capitalism, which starts, depending on how you count, in the 16th and 17th century in England, that time that Shakespeare's plays began to see and explore. And from the time of capitalism's dominance, there develops a push of the capitalist system that moves it from a few cities to a whole country, from a whole country to a continent, basically Europe, and then from that continent to become global. In other words, the history of capitalism is the history of expansion, of economic growth. It was 5 centuries ago, and it has been throughout up to this moment. Part of that growth took the form of the capitalist economies, the most developed in the world, the British, the French, the German, the Dutch, and later on the Turkish, the Japanese, and so on, taking colonies, sending military groups out from those countries to fight and take over other parts of the world, particularly in areas like Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In other words, capitalism spawned the most aggressive colonialism. Why was it most aggressive? Because it eventually covered the whole globe. No earlier effort to grow and expand had ever been that enormous, that comprehensive. So there's a close relationship between the capitalist system, that way of organizing the production of goods and services so that a small group, employers, control and tell what to do to a very large group, the employees. That arrangement, which is capitalism's core, produced a colonialism in which the people of Europe, mainly white, became dominant and masters of people in Asia, Africa, Latin America who were, let us say, black and brown as a shorthand. And of course, this created the notion that maybe what's going on here is not about capitalism and its urge to grow and how that played out over these centuries. Maybe the issue is not about that, but about that other interesting reality that the people who took over were white and the people who got taken over were black and brown. Well, the problem with that analysis is that we know why capitalism took over the rest of the world. We have no explanation for why white people did to brown as opposed to any other arrangement. Here's what I mean. We know that capitalists, to succeed, have to grow. Every capitalist tries to develop his, her, their own business. They're in competition. They're afraid if they don't develop their own, a competitor will, and they'll be driven out of business. The whole structure of capitalism is a competitive struggle. Some people win that competition and become large, powerful. Those are the big corporations we know today. The companies they outcompeted, we don't know anymore because they're gone, swallowed up by those who won the competition. Many became few, small became large. And along the way, they become large enough to control their governments, to make those governments go out and get them places around the world where they can get food for their workers, raw materials for their factories, and customers for what they sell. Capitalism shaped the world. We can see it, we can measure it, we can follow it. Meanwhile, capitalism is very uneven. There are many parts of the capitalist world where there are lots of white people who are desperately poor. If any of you have any doubts about it, I can take you to many parts of the United States where the population is very poor and very white. It's not at all the case that white is rich and successful and black and brown isn't. That's a misunderstanding that doesn't see the role of capitalism. And here's the irony. We've had several centuries of capitalism with its urge to grow, and grow it has. And we've seen now at least a century or two of pretty sustained pushback against the dominance by white people of black and brown. But that dominance we don't seem to be able to shake real well. It stays with us. And that's not because people are necessarily prejudiced one against the other or care that much about the color of your skin. It has to do with the fact that we haven't solved the problem of capitalism. We haven't developed a system that doesn't need to grow in order to survive, that hasn't got the urge to take over more and more of the world, to burn more and more fossil fuels, to make more money. This almost insane drive is what is causing us problems now. It looked good in the early phases when we had growth, but now the growth is a problem, and the fight back is beginning to be very, very powerful. So I think, now I admit it's partly a hope, that the mistaken notion that what we have here are important differences among white people versus brown people versus black people will go the way of other notions, that it's really different and important whether the color of your hair is one thing or another, or the shape of your elbow, or the height of your body, or a million other things that vary amongst us, but take on an odd meaning because we're afraid of looking at that problem of capitalism, which is the problem of our age.